Hello everyone, this is Mr. Lawback. This is a quick APUSH Period 5 review. Period 5 is 13% of the big APUSH test. Period 5 starts with the election of James K. Polk in 1844 and ends with the Compromise of 1877, which results in Rutherford B. Hayes winning the presidency. It is very important to know about Manifest Destiny and the expansion of the United States at this point in history. Manifest Destiny was a widely held belief in the mid-19th century that American settlers were entitled to conquer and control North America. A famous illustration related to this was John Gass' painting, American Progress, which you can see down here at the right. President James K. Polk, although he was a one-termer, had a big goal of American expansion. Think of the disputed annexation of Texas, the controversial Mexican-American War, and the following Mexican Cession, which happened due to the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, which also ended the Mexican War and expanded U.S. territory by a third. The big issue of the day was slavery. As the nation grew, should slavery spread also, was the big question. On the issue of slavery, there were abolitionists who wanted to end slavery altogether. Think of the literature like Uncle Tom's Cabin and, of course, the Underground Railroad. But there were also free soilers that did not want to end slavery where it already was, but wanted to prevent it from spreading to new territories. They wanted the new land to be for free white people, so they should not be confused with abolitionists. This movement would eventually merge into the Republican Party. Prior to the Civil War, there were many attempted compromises that failed and only led to more sectional, regional tension between the North and the South. Some examples of these events would be the Wilmot Proviso, which was not passed, the Compromise of 1850, which had 5 parts, which included the Fugitive Slave Act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which called for popular sovereignty in regards to slavery and led to Bleeding Kansas, the Dred Scott Supreme Court ruling, the Harper's Ferry raid by radical abolitionist John Brown and his gang. Adding to the regional conflict was the drastic economic and cultural differences between the North and the South. The North was an increasingly industrial society and saw a large growth from immigration. The South was a largely agrarian society, of course based on agriculture, and obviously was very dependent on slavery. The big single event that led to Southern secession was the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. First, the Deep South seceded, and later the Upper South did. Now for the causes of the Civil War. The issue of states' rights. Again, there were large economic and way of life differences, or cultural differences. But make no mistake about it, the single most important issue that led to the Civil War was the issue of slavery. The start of the fighting of the war began at Fort Sumter, South Carolina in 1861 and ultimately ran until 1865. It was not a very deadly battle, but it signified the beginning of the war. The North won the Civil War due to a variety of factors. Superior resources, especially industrial power, railroads, and telegraph capability. The North also had excellent leadership in President Abraham Lincoln. While the South had great military leaders, Lincoln was a great political leader. More effective strategies. Think of the Anaconda Plan and General Sherman's Total War. The picture on the top right is a famous cartoon about the Anaconda Plan. The North also had a larger population, which was being supplemented by immigrants. And the North also had the crucial support of the slaveholding border states in Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, and later West Virginia. The Civil War was the deadliest war in U.S. history, with well over 600,000 deaths. Some of the key battles were Antietam, which inspired Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which altered the focus of the war to also being ending slavery and led to around 200,000 blacks to join the Union military. The Battle of Vicksburg, which gave the Union control of the entire Mississippi River, and the Battle of Gettysburg, which stopped Confederate advances north for the final time. The war, of course, ended with General Lee's surrender to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The bottom right is a famous painting of this event. The end of the war resulted in the freeing of approximately 4 million enslaved people and the preservation of the Union. Now, of course, there were many important impacts to the Civil War additionally. Reconstruction was the period following the Civil War in which attempts were made to redress the inequities of slavery and its political, social, and economic legacy, and to solve the problems arising from the readmission of the 11 states that had seceded. Reconstruction was not about the federal government rebuilding the infrastructure of the South. That was left up to the state and local governments. And remember, much of the South was destroyed by the Civil War because that's where most of the fighting took place. The Reconstruction era forever changed the relationship between the federal government and the governments of the states. Even before the end of the Civil War, Lincoln introduced a 10% plan, which called for a very easy readmittance of Southern states. Radical Republicans pushed back. They pushed forth the Wade-Davis bill, which was a more strict proposal of Reconstruction, but Lincoln pocket vetoed it, so it never happened. Lincoln, of course, was assassinated shortly after the end of the war in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, took over. Johnson also called for easy readmittance of the ex-Confederate states. Now, a lot went down between Johnson and Congress, including his impeachment over the Tenure of Office Act, but he was able to remain in office. And it would be quite an understatement to say that him and Congress did not get along. In the fall of 1866 congressional elections, Northern voters overwhelmingly rejected Johnson's policies and elected many radical Republicans to Congress. With this new bolstered majority, Republicans decided to begin Reconstruction again. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 divided the South into 5 military districts and outlined how new governments in the South should operate. This began a period of what was known as Radical Reconstruction or Congressional Reconstruction, which lasted until 1877. It should be noted that within a brief period during the Reconstruction era, blacks voted in large numbers and held public office almost at every level, including in both houses of Congress. Hiram Revels of Mississippi was the first black person elected to the U.S. Senate. However, this provoked a violent backlash from whites who did not want to give up their supremacy in the South. This happened in the form of Southern Democratic Redeemer governments. These Redeemer governments implemented oppressive black codes and later Jim Crow laws, and happened violently through organizations like the KKK and the White League. This Southern backlash succeeded, and the promises of Reconstruction were mostly unfulfilled. Now for the Reconstruction Amendments. They were Amendments 13, 14, and 15. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, which included former slaves recently freed. This amendment also did a bunch of other things. The 15th Amendment guaranteed that the right to vote could not be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude or slavery. The 15th Amendment did, however, divide the women's suffrage movement into two camps. One camp favored its ratification. The other thought that women should be included in it as well. Now, there were many failures in Reconstruction, which you should be familiar with, but probably one of the biggest successes was the Freedmen's Bureau. Civil War hero Ulysses S. Grant took over for Johnson, but his presidency was tarnished by scandals like the Credit Mobilier and the Whiskey Ring. In short, Ulysses S. Grant turned out to be a much better general than he was a president. Now, he probably was not corrupt, but many people in his administration were. The presidential election of 1876 was between Samuel Tilden, a Democrat, and Rutherford B. Hayes, a Republican. When the results came in, they were disputed, so as the Constitution dictates, it went to Congress. The Republicans negotiated and basically bribed Democrats to vote for Hayes. But the Democrats had one condition, that the Republicans would end military districts and the federal occupation in the South. The North's appetite for Reconstruction was waning or fading, and Republicans at the time were desperate, so they struck the deal, which also became known as the Compromise of 1877. This compromise ultimately ended Reconstruction. So I hope this video helps you better understand the importance of Period 5. Have a great rest of the day.